Kai like a pro. If this is your first Kai, clap your hands and shout. Woo! So happy to see you here. I just want to really quickly introduce my fellow student mentoring program chairs, Ferran and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you will be seeing later, and also the assistants, Hao Yu and Vikram. Today, I'm going to be discussing something that when I was a student, I felt like things did not go very well because I had no idea what to do at a huge conference, and I was very intimidated, and I'm also very introverted. So I spent my first conference 8 hours attending papers all day, and then I was exhausted and went home to the hotel. And later, my advisor said, "Oh, did you have fun at the parties and the reception?" And I was like, "Parties? Receptions?" I just went to all of these talks, and I realized that that was not the best way to navigate a conference. And since then, it's taken a long time, but now I feel more confident and have more friends, and it's become a more enjoyable rather than stressful experience. And so we put this session together to really help you understand what are the benefits of attending Kai and maybe some tips and tricks that you don't hear normally through the paper sessions. So I'm going to quickly run through a presentation that goes through some of the things that I've learned and also some research-based evidence of best ways in which you can navigate Kai. So one of the main reasons why we attend conferences is to meet people, right? All of the papers are online on the digital ACM library. And so technically, you don't have to be here to read them. However, meeting people and forming your network is really important. And if you look at the literature, finding weak ties and strong ties is very important, and ultimately things like getting a job, finding collaborators, recruiting students when you're later faculty, for example, very important. When we look at the power of networks, in the US, 2 random people are connected on average with 6 degrees of separation. But with social media, researchers say that it's now 3.5 degrees. In the ACM community, in the Kai community, probably it's like somewhere around 2. So if you know someone who knows someone who knows someone, it's usually someone you know. And the thing about the academic community is we'd like to think it's very large, but it's actually very small. And especially when you're on the job market, people will definitely be asking around to ask people whether they know you and what kind of person you are. So today I want to talk about 2 different kinds of ties, weak ties and strong ties. Now, I would like to take credit for this idea, but actually, this concept of the strength of weak ties comes from sociologist Mark Granovetter, who introduced this concept in the 70s. And he goes into this theory about how it's really important to have these weak ties who are people that you know but are not very, very close to, because this is where you get new information. And they're also critical in terms of spreading new ideas. And so the reason why you need these weak ties is because it opens up a lot of career opportunities. And if you go to Google Scholar right now and Google weak ties job opportunities, you will see thousands of studies proving that weak ties contribute to people not only getting their job, but also getting promotions. And the reason for this, I cannot go into all of the scientific detail, but the gist of it is that it's because the people who are close to you have similar or redundant information, and so it's only through these weaker connections that you have access to more novel information. And so most job referrals come through, empirically, through people who we see rarely, for example, old school friends, former coworkers, etc. And this extends beyond being a student as well. Later on, if you're faculty or have a job, performance or tenure is usually based on reviews of people who are not close to you. And so this is something that hopefully you will continue to understand throughout your career, continuing in your career, that weak ties open up a lot of job opportunities. And a conference is the best place to find these weak ties. However, building strong ties are also important because getting a PhD is really, really hard and stressful and lonely. And it's really important to have a strong, supportive social network. And sometimes, especially for those of you who are in very large departments or maybe large schools, you have that resource in your department. But a lot of times you don't. And so this building a network of people who are perhaps outside of your school, outside of your department, can be really helpful because they will help you throughout your career, especially during the job search, but also beyond. The job search is a very non-transparent process, and I know a lot of you are not thinking about that right now, but the interesting thing is it's very similar to PhD admissions in some sense, where you've submitted an application, but you don't really know where your application is in the pipeline, and you don't have any background information on what's going on at the place that you want to be employed. And so the more friends you have at different universities, you can pool this information together and get a better sense of what's going on behind the scenes. So that's really, really useful. So how do you prepare and meet these weak ties and strong ties at a conference? First of all, you want to develop an elevator speech, which is perhaps one sentence that describes your research or who you are. And then look at the program in advance and build a tentative schedule. A lot of times, especially if you want to meet someone who is very well established, you want to reach out in advance because their time may already be booked up. If you're here with your advisor, maybe you can ask them to introduce you to specific people, and expect to be involved day and night. There are a lot of formal activities and events, but there are also a lot of informal receptions and parties and things that a lot of times you wouldn't know unless you had, for example, a friend who was part of that university that was hosting a party. So some cool ways to connect professionally. One is to ask intelligent questions after talks. I don't know how many of you attended the morning session today, but it's really hard to ask a very cool question. And presenters usually remember you if you ask something that is both meaningful and thought-provoking. So that is one thing. Another thing is you could follow up after the talk in person or via email. Another suggestion that I have is to go to poster sessions and demos, especially to find other students. Maybe you'll find a collaborator, maybe you'll find a friend. A lot of times, especially new students think, oh, I need to go to a conference to meet all of these famous people, but which is also true to some extent, but I think meeting peers is really much more important because you'll be growing up with them, right? And the person sitting next to you might not seem like a big deal very much, but you never know, 5 years, 10 years down the line, who knows who they'll be at the time, and hopefully you will be in a more prominent position at that time as well. Another thing, a little bit late for this year, but perhaps for next year, is to be a student volunteer. And being a student volunteer is a lot of work, but also comes with a lot of special opportunities to make friends and also meet some prominent scholars. A little bit of tips about conduct. At receptions, let people get to know your personality. Some people say don't talk shop talk during the receptions, and some people say it's okay. I think, a good balance is always good, but you do want to let people know that you're collegial and nice, which is something that doesn't come across in a CV, for example. And this is something that is really important because, like I said, through weak ties, later on when you're on the job market, people will ask, oh, have you heard of so-and-so? And if people have a positive impression of you, that's always really good because that's something that is very hard to determine through a resume. Also have fun, but be responsible because people will still be evaluating you. At some of the events, there might be alcohol. Please drink responsibly. And always have fun, but yes, who knows who's watching, right? So do be careful about that. Do fun extracurricular things. Of course, it's really important to attend the conference as much as possible, but we're also in a very exciting and vibrant city, so make sure you go out and do a couple of fun things, maybe with someone who is new, and that's always a really good way to meet people. Pay attention to personal hygiene. This is something that a lot of people don't talk about because they don't want to be rude, but in a place where there's lots of people, making sure you're paying attention to that is very important. And also, don't feel like you have to be here 24/7. If you're feeling tired, take a break, because nobody likes a cranky person. I personally, I told you earlier that I'm an introvert, and so I love meeting people, but it drains a lot of my energy. So sometimes I have to go take a 5-minute nap or a 10-minute nap, and don't feel guilty about doing that, because when you are actually meeting people, you want to show your best energized face, right? And then yes, please do go to the receptions and parties, and this is really intimidating, especially if you're a first-year student, but trust me, it does get better over time. Our technical programs chairs did talk about this in our opening session today, but there are a lot of non-paper opportunities that I strongly encourage you to take advantage of, because these are ephemeral things that are not in the digital library, for example, like going to interact at a demo, going to the meetups, going to town halls, and there's so much more. And so I do encourage you to look at these opportunities through the program. Also, overcoming networking fear. This is a real thing, and you should not be ashamed about it. If you do have a mentor who can guide you around, it doesn't have to be your advisor. It just has to be someone who maybe has a little bit more experience than you. Or traveling in pairs with a friend. I used to do this a lot. I still do this with one of my professor friends. But I would not encourage you to travel in very large groups. And that is because if you're in a very large group, it's very hard for new people to approach you. Whereas if you're just with another person, someone might come up and say hi, right? So opening yourself up to opportunity. Finally, after the conference, managing your ties. If you've met someone during the conference, connecting with them over social media. We have some great research coming out of our community that has shown that even something as simple as wishing someone a happy birthday helps maintain those relationships. Or following up over email, especially if you had a very short conversation with someone. Remind them that you enjoyed meeting them at CHI, and so maybe, who knows, 3 months, 1 year, 3 years down the road, if you have to email that person again, there is a record of your conversation with them, and that also really helps. Last slide, I promise. So takeaways, weak relationships open up more career opportunities, but it only works if you keep them informed. So if you're looking, for example, no one will offer you opportunities if they don't know you're looking for it. So for example, we have a reception tonight. Are you looking for an internship? Say you're looking for an internship. Are you looking for a collaborator? Say you're looking for a collaborator. Volunteer your information and your availability for people to be able to help you. Second, strong homophily could segregate you from the broader world, but it's good for moral support. So for example, I'm Korean. There's a bunch of Koreans that always hang out at conferences, and that's really good for morale and for meeting people who you feel safe with, right? However, if you confine yourself to those groups, then you're not opening yourself up to other opportunities, right? So a balance is always really important. Third, I didn't really talk about this at length earlier, but there's this concept in the weak ties literature that is about brokers. And these are people who are kind of like social butterflies who just seem to be connected to everyone else. And if you can identify these people, knowing someone who is very outgoing and connected to a lot of people can be just as useful as making those connections yourself. So if you see someone who is really social, be their friend. Finally, do have fun. It really does get better over time. I know my students tell me that they don't believe me when I say this, but at my first conference reception, I stood on the wall as a wallflower, and I was cold sweating the whole time. And if you know me now, I'm no longer like that. But it takes a little bit of time to get there. So I do encourage you to go to as many conferences as possible. CHI is really big, but there are a lot of other smaller conferences and regional conferences, and every time you do it, it just gets easier. All right, well, thank you so much, and I'd like to invite our panelists now up to the stage. Yeah.
From the last time we were in Barcelona and blew off a conference.
Oh my God. So
As an example.
Phoebe was just showing me a picture of.
It's not going to show up.
Oh, it's yeah.
Too bad.
Yeah, we basically did not go to the paper session, and we went to go see the Sagrada Familia. So, and also, Bon and I, we were SVs together a very, very long time ago. And in Austin, we went to go take photographs around the city because that's what we like to do. So, yes. All right. So let me quickly introduce our panelists. Well, maybe I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. So let's start off with Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me here. I'm Elizabeth Churchill, and I am currently the department chair of and a professor of HCI at Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, MBZ UAI, in Abu Dhabi. I went there 2 years ago to start up the department, and currently, we are launching a PhD and master's program, which we got accredited, and I want to say thanks to all the folks who helped me with that. And we'll get our first PhD cohort in August. But prior to that, I spent 2.5 decades in Silicon Valley in industry. So I made the hop to academia just 2 years ago.
Thank you. Next, Phoebe.
Hi, Phoebe Toop-Stugas, she, her. I'm an associate professor of human-centered computing at Monash University in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. I've been there about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was in the US at New Mexico State for about 10 years, and then prior to that in Texas and Japan and a few other places. So all of my life has been in academia.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Bon Adriel Sanyero. I am currently a principal research scientist at Autodesk Research. Prior to that, I did my studies in University of Calgary, and I've been attending CHI since 2012. It's been a while, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists for agreeing to be part of this session today. I did prepare a few questions that I thought we would run through, and then we'll open it up to the audience. The first one is, what is something that you wish you knew when you were a first-time CHI attendee, if you can think back to that time?
Before we get going, can I ask a favor? Could we have the lights up a little bit? Because I would love to see your gorgeous faces, just even a little bit. So whoever's in charge of lights, could you just take them up just a little? Because I can't see you. All right, so that's a little bit better. Lovely, thank you.
Hey.
What is something you wished you knew? Well, I think, Yvette, you did a fantastic job of actually going through a lot of the key points. Because when nobody would believe me now either, but when I first went to CHI, my first CHI, I felt extremely shy. And I felt completely intimidated by people who were, giving amazing presentations. I went as a student volunteer, and I always recommend people take up the student volunteer position if they can, because it's a great way to build that network that will take you through into your future. But I was, extremely intimidated by all the people giving these amazing talks and thought I'd never be able to do that, not really. And I couldn't actually go and talk to them because they were all so clever, and they would instantly discover how not clever I was. And it was only at the end of CHI, that was what I went into with my fear and my heart. But it was by the end of CHI, after I'd talked to enough people and been honest about that feeling, that I was overwhelmed and a bit shy, that I managed to recruit some people who were less shy to help me and to have me come to small group dinners and so forth. So really reinforcing what Yvette just said. One, find people who will support you. Be honest about, when you're feeling nervous, and find the opportunities that are the sort of safe space for you, if it's a small dinner or just going for tea with a few people, where you can really practice sort of being a little more confident and reaching out to people. And the other part of that was realizing that I could talk to senior people who were established, and that in the best sense of the word, if you go up to somebody and talk to them about their research and show interest in their research, they will be flattered, they will love it, and they will love to talk to you about what they're doing, and then you will find some common ground with them. So in the best sense of the word, flattered, I think tell people you're really excited about their work, because you will find the creative heart in them, no matter how senior they are. And that's a really good way of striking up a sort of conversation almost of peers, peers around ideas, even if you're not peers in terms of status or level of career.
Thank you. I mean, I think what you, the peer concept is really great, because I think academia is also one of those few places where you could be a colleague even if you're 30, 40 years apart, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Phoebe, did you want to add to that?
Sure. So a lot of the things, I think definitely a lot of the important things have been hit. I think one other thing I want to echo from Yvette earlier is around, especially when you're a student, get to know all the other students. Because I definitely also came into Chi with the sense like, oh, I've got to meet this person, I've got to meet that person. And I was also super nervous and scared to talk to people. And I was there to give my first talk, actually, which was horrifying. This was back in 2007, so almost 20 years ago, disturbingly. But so many people that I've met through being a student volunteer or doctoral consortium or just hanging around posters and going to talks and meeting other students. Like, it was Cliff Lampy and Helen Mentis who just, I don't remember which award it was this morning, what it's like, but like service award. I met them all when we were students, and it was just, we're just students, right? There's no pressure. And it's very easy to connect. So that's kind of my big thing.
Wohn, what do you remember being a first-time Chi attendee?
Yeah, so I would like to echo everything that has been said so far. When I started, I was actually an undergraduate, so I was still doing my bachelor's. I was just about to go into the master's degree, and so at the time, I really didn't even know what was going to happen, right? My supervisor was just like, I think this will be a great opportunity. And so I said, I mean, I get to travel, why not? And so when I went there, I got lucky. I got into the student volunteer program. And my supervisor at the time really told me to, join the student volunteer program, do well, and try to meet as many people as you can. But I was a shy student. I didn't even really know what I was doing. However, I think what helped me a lot was because I knew some people within my group who are a little bit more mature in their studies, and they helped me kind of meet new people. And even if I was shy and not really talking, I still made notes of like, oh, so this person is, they went to this school, this is what their research are, and then later on when you see them again at some point, you can tell, oh yeah, like we met previously, I was an undergrad, but I really followed your work. And also, if you're really interested in their work, definitely tell them that. I think everybody would like to kind of have even like a smaller community within this bigger community with the same interests. But yeah, and I guess smile even if you're really shy. And, and I'm still very anxious even, to today, but just,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Can I add one other quick thing? The student volunteering thing, one of the key things, and I think it actually kind of answers like several of the next few questions too. If you're a student volunteer and you go to paper sessions, and I don't know if you can even game it anymore, but if you can try to get ones with people you're interested in, they then have to talk to you. You're there to help them. You have to make sure that you're there helping out, and so I don't know. That is a way that I actually connected with several people when I was a student as well. So.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that the student volunteer program is so competitive, and so I know that there are people who have applied every year and still not gotten it. other than the CHI student volunteer program, most other conferences also have student volunteer programs, right?
And actually to that point of like finding smaller communities too, a lot of the sort of satellite conferences are a bit smaller and are also a good way to sort of meet CHI people or other HCI people who are in your area. And many of them also have student volunteers that are maybe a little easier to get into, so.
Great, thank you. So we talked about this a little bit, but what is the best way to approach senior people? Like, you know, these established scholars that you cited, but never met in person?
Well, I'm going to say something sort of from the other side, which is if you approach a senior person, I mean, one thing, you can email them before. The second thing is, you know, if you see them by themselves or something, you can go and introduce yourself. I actually still believe in carrying cards sometimes, so I can hand a card. And the other really critical thing, or, you know, show them this and say, you know,
Oh no, I've got my cards.
oh, you've got your cards. Or you can say, you know, would you mind if I contact you? But don't be upset if they don't seem to be able to give you attention in that moment. And always, obviously, say, I'm really sorry to bother you. I know you're probably very busy, but I would love to have some time to chat with you. If you're not free now, may I follow up later? May I email you? My name is, or here's my card. And just be super respectful of their time and space, because if they are senior, they're probably extremely busy and probably on some kind of level of organization of the conference, as well as presenting, as well as having their own students here that they're supporting, as well as having other mentees around. And so if you feel like you've gotten your courage up and you're getting a little bit of what feels like a cold shoulder, do not take it personally. Like I say, I know very, very, very few, vanishingly small number of senior people who aren't interested in talking to smart people about what their work is and what they're interested in, and who aren't here to be supportive to the next generation of scholars in HCI. But if you get a bit of a cold response, it's almost certainly because they are multitasking, and you got them at the wrong moment, or, you know, they're out of their social energy and need to go and have a nap. Because, you know, a lot of the senior people also are people who are a bit introverted maybe and might need just a bit of a break. So just don't get disheartened by what feels like a cold response. Just give them the gracious way to find you, or for you to find them at another moment.
I think that's a great comment, because a lot of the very established or well-known scholars, like in my research area, are they have a little bit of social anxiety, and so you know, don't think that just because someone's senior that they're better at social skills than you are.
Can I add to that? Also, if you have the chance to attend parties, I think some of the senior people will be there as well, and it's a more casual, laid-back place. And, you know, maybe they're looking for a drink. And yeah, just approach them, have fun.
But I do like the comment earlier as well. You know, for a lot of people, a glass of wine is Dutch courage. and try to just keep it to maybe one. Because Dutch courage can turn into you not understanding how to navigate boundaries.
Maybe a sip.
I think it also takes maybe, you know, a couple times to actually remember someone.
Yeah.
Because I met Elizabeth when I was a student, and the next time we met, you didn't recognize me because the first time was a very short interaction. So again, like, even if you've met someone before, don't be shy about, you know, introducing yourself again. And it's really not personal, because like you see so many faces, and I, for example, I'm terrible at names, so I will forget, but it's not because I, you know, completely forgot. It's just my memory is just not great. So
Yeah, plus one.
Yeah, so usually I can remember faces, so I probably won't look surprised if you talk to me again, but I probably will try to figure out what your name is. I might glance at your name badge. Also, don't let your name badge get hidden. It's maybe also just general useful advice.
I think there's another thing I want to add to that, which is also context. And so when you're running around, when you're jet lagged, when you meet somebody and the context you met them in was that they were a student volunteer helping you. And like I say, I'm terrible with names too as well. The next time you meet them,
I don't believe that.
well, the next time I meet them, they might now be, assistant professor, whatever, at place, and they say, "Hi, Elizabeth, remember me?" And I'll be like, "Maybe, where did I meet you?" But if you do exactly what you just said, if you do this sort of like, "Hi, my name is, Jane Smith, and I was your student volunteer at, Conference X, and you did this great talk on whatever," suddenly what you're doing is giving me context so I can remember you. And also, we all change what we look like. Some people change more than others, but you see somebody 3 years later and they might look very different. And so saying like, "Hi, it's me, Jane Smith. Do you remember you did that great talk and I was your student volunteer at, whatever conference?" You kind of go, "Oh, wait, you fixed all of the lighting that went down. I'm so grateful to you. I talk about what you did and how you saved the day." And then you've also got that relationship build, as well as giving context for the memory to come back.
I don't know how you feel, but I like to try to remember something about that person that has nothing to do with their research and then bring that up later. Like, for example, if they post a lot of photos of their cats on social media, I'll be, "Oh, how is your, cat doing?" And even if they don't remember who I am, they know that I'm connected with them through social media, and will suddenly be very chatty about their cat. This is Sue Fussell, who's also a senior member of our community, and that's kind of how I got close to her, by talking to her a lot about her cats. So it doesn't always have to be about research.
I bumped into Elizabeth Buey on the elevator yesterday, and because she told me I was misspelling stationery on social media, and I was like, "Oh, hey, talk about stationery in the elevator."
Do you have any tips for what people could potentially do to make themselves more memorable in these interactions?
That's such a good question. I think actually just what you just said. I mean, actually being helpful, being interested, and telling you something personal about themselves. It's like, "Oh, I see you've lived in multiple places. I've also lived in 5 or 6 different places, and I spent quite a lot of time in Japan." And those kinds of little stories, suddenly you have a connection to that person, and a connection to their personal life and their heart and their interests.
All right, great, thank you. Kind of along those lines, but what is the best way to meet friends rather than senior people, your peers?
You mean make friends or meet friends when you're here?
Meet and make. Is that cheating?
I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I just see all of my friends when I come here, and we never manage to coordinate anything. But the making friends may the hard part.
How does one go about making friends when you're a newcomer?
So part of it is certainly going to the social events when you have the energy to do that. And there's some piece around connecting over research, but I think also it's, connecting over all the personal things. It's, I want to know what animes you're watching or games you're playing and whatever, those kinds of nerd things. Most of us here are nerds, in some definition.
That's right.
I think, you mentioned this earlier, I think attending poster sessions, where it's more casual as well, right? And again, a lot of these people would be your peers, if you're a student. And just make connections, ask them, "Oh, which school are you in?" And then, and that goes there. Also, I've been fiddling on this, but make use of the stickers. I believe that the registration desk has. So, mine says, sponsor. But if you have a talk, have the presenter tag, and that kind of is an easy way to kind of, "Oh, hi, I have a talk." Or if you wanted to talk to someone and you see that they have the ribbon, ask them about what the ribbon is for. And sometimes some people even bring custom stickers, which were really
Yeah.
cute. Yeah, so you can also do that, right? You can put, I like turtles.
Part of my past tricks was to just bring like Pokemon stickers and just like offer them to people,
I love
to add to their badges. So
I think another thing is that if you do get chatting to somebody, like right now, I mean, the weather was dreadful yesterday, but it's getting better. You know, saying to somebody, I'd love to chat with you more about your work. Would you be interested to go for a walk or to go and sit outside and, you know, enjoy the air? Because I think those shared experiences, when you get out of the sort of rarefied space of the conference, make a huge difference. So, you know, if you hear that somebody is going to some museum or something, may I tag along? I'd love to go to that. Can we walk there together? I mean, just, you know, the thing is that we've already brokered some of the contact because we're all at the same conference in this area that is sort of loosely related. So, you know, you're not complete strangers. So to do some things together around the social aspects of the conference, or go for a walk, go and see the place that we're in, like Barcelona, I think you start to find the humanity in someone else, which is the bedrock of building a friendship.
That's a great point. I feel like all of the people that I've developed meaningful connections with at conferences were not at the conference, but doing other kind of extracurricular activities, like going to the museum. Like we've been to a few museums across the years, and I have a story of, I had a very outgoing friend who loved karaoke, and I also love karaoke. So she got together a group of friends, and so every Kai, we would go do karaoke. And I did not, like the members of that team, I don't know what their research is. We were just Kai karaoke friends. Fast forward several years later, our school suddenly has this joint program with some universities in Europe. And they said, look at the list of faculty here, and if you can find someone to collaborate with, we'll give you some money to do research. And I looked at that list, and there was my karaoke friend, who I didn't even know what kind of research she was doing. But, you know, we talked and we put something together, and we got this research fund. So I think, you know, a lot of times you might think, oh, I need to meet like so many people, but maybe it's just that one person, right? Like, if anything, if you could walk away from this conference having met one person, I think that is still very useful.
And also look out for things like, there are various people who organize things like the morning running. And so when you're on pick your social media preference or whatever, or as you're planning to come, find those events and those things that people are putting together that they might have just put out on even LinkedIn or whatever your favorite platform is. Because then you go and you meet and you've got that shared interest. If I'd known that you were into karaoke, I would have like busted on in there.
yeah, I know. I'm like, where is Kai karaoke?
Yeah, where are we going?
Oh, maybe we should organize.
Okay,
Somebody in the audience, this is your chance.
this is your opportunity. There's at least 3 senior people who want to go do karaoke.
Because we all want to go and sing.
Add me to that.
Okay, 4.
But that's also a good suggestion. Like, you don't have to wait for someone to do this, right? If you feel passionate about jogging or, you know, whatever, hiking or something, you just put it out there. And I'm sure there are at least a couple of people you could say, like, meet in front of the registration desk at 4 p.m. and we're all gonna go for whatever the cool thing is, like matcha lattes or I don't know what.
And maybe if you're going to do that, if you need help getting the word out, definitely go with the SVs, right? Just
Oh, yeah.
tell
Yeah.
the SVs, maybe tell the SB chairs.
Yeah.
And then you have a bunch of students who knows, and we'll spread the word around. Yeah.
And like find those opportunities. So my first Kai was a very long time ago, and as I say, I was a student volunteer. And at that time, I had my own little teaching business. I was teaching aerobics to help me with my funding at Cambridge University, which is where I was. Anyway, so I was talking to a senior person, Wendy Kellogg, who some of you may remember, and I had said to her, oh, I teach aerobics when I'm not doing this. And she said, oh, well, what about 8 o'clock on Thursday morning? We get anybody who's interested and you just lead a class. And I was like, really? And like I say, I was pretty shy at that time, but I wasn't shy in my aerobics teaching persona because that was my business and I was pretty good at it. And so we just had this small group of people who showed up in a room that somebody had managed to organize for us. And we did sort of stretching and light aerobics. And at least there were some senior people there and some junior people in a spread. And I got to know those people fairly well. But, you know, it was, and they became friends, a lot of them later afterwards, stayed in touch. So, you know, it doesn't even have to be that planful. It could be something that you're, right, tonight, who's karaokeing? Or anyone want to go for a jog? Whatever it might be. So it doesn't have to be overthought.
Yeah. Or like pet parent meetup or something like that.
Yeah.
It could be anything.
I didn't do it this year, but I usually have a board game or two in my luggage, just, you know, just bust it out. And if it's in a more public place, people will actually just kind of come, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Cool. When it comes to finding potential collaborators, are there any tips or things that we need to be careful about when approaching people about doing research together?
I collaborate with anybody that like comes by with an interesting project, which is a dangerous thing to do, because then you have no time. But I think people are often open to these things, and barring time zones or current situation and technology makes it pretty easy to be able to do cool stuff, you know, anywhere in the world. So
I think you also, again, start broadcasting that you've got an idea and who else would like to be interested in it. You know, I was thinking about doing research into physical board games because we do so much that's digital. So, you know, I brought a couple of board games. Anybody else interested in starting a collaboration around that?
yes.
Right, that's another one.
Oh no.
Maybe workshops. They did change the workshops starting this year. But I do remember like when you used to have to submit papers, right? And I think you still have to do that, but you can, like, it's now open to everyone. If you see a workshop that you find is interesting or relevant to what you're working on, definitely try to attend it. And these are kind of more interactive, right? Like the audience can engage with the speakers or the group. Sometimes they go out for lunches. So I think that is a good place to start, because then there's the context, right? Of like, oh, we're all kind of doing this idea.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also,
That's
meetups.
a great idea, yeah.
Oh yes, meetup.
Meetups, which are even less formal. Yeah.
So you can also do, like I've done several times, and do the like enemies to lovers trope. Not actual lovers, but just there have been a number of times when I was a student, I was just like, it's so frustrating they're doing this research that I want to be doing it. And it turns out it's like, if you want to be doing it, you could probably just meet them at the conference, and then, hey, now we're doing research together. I don't know why I had such like a grumpy framing at that point, but yeah, some of my best collaborators and best friends, honestly, at this point, maybe started that way. So.
Yeah.
Maybe last one for me. Interactivity during the, there's going to be booths, especially for like sponsors or research labs, or and sometimes there will be people there recruiting. I'm from Autodesk Research. We always hire interns, advertising. So just like talk to them and just say, hey, I'm interested in doing an internship. Can you talk to me more about that? And if they're in the booth or something, I'm pretty sure they'd be really open to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think you would be surprised. A lot of times, especially people who are very self-conscious think, oh, like, am I really qualified to do this? And like, you might underestimate yourself, but you would be really surprised at how much like personality also matters, because, if you're hiring an internship and you get like a couple hundred resumes, it's really hard to pick people apart, right? But if you've met someone at the conference and you had a good conversation, you know that they're an interesting person that could really, like, even if you were perhaps like a slightly less qualified than someone else, it might still be able to get you the job.
Yeah, I think, and this is something that's related, and it's kind of to that last question, which are, what are things to be careful about? I love that you had said that you take notes after you've had a good conversation with somebody, because I do think it's important to write down those notes, especially if you're talking to somebody about research ideas, because the provenance of ideas, we live in a world that somewhat fetishizes the single individual genius. And the reality is that we all work together and we stand on the ideas and on the shoulders of people before, and we also co-create ideas. And it is quite easy to, if you don't take notes and you're careful, to go away and sort of, have shower thoughts about the ideas, and then somehow they become yours. But one of the absolutely most important things to not do is to not record the provenance of ideas that spark interest in you, because it costs you nothing to reach out and say, I want to thank you so much for helping me generate these ideas. I think I'm going to take idea A, B, and C forward in the following ways. Would you be interested in continuing the conversation? And you might be, like many of us, too busy, the person who's being asked. So you say, well, I can't take that on right now. But then if you take that idea, you go and you write that paper, and the person who sparked the ideas for you hasn't got the time or the bandwidth to work on it, send them the draft of the paper anyway and say, this came from these ideas. Do you mind if I acknowledge you? Because that provenance and letting others know that they spark great ideas for you, and that your career maybe started from a conversation, because maybe you go off and you're so passionate about this topic and it becomes your career. But the kernel was that one conversation you had, while waiting in the coffee line with Phoebe, and just saying, hey, Phoebe, I just wanted to let you know I've really taken some of these ideas forward. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge you, but if I know you don't have bandwidth, but I just wanted to come back to you to say that it meant so much difference. That is what peers do. That is what, and it doesn't matter whether you're junior talking to senior or vice versa. That is how we build community, and we build ideas that build on each other, and that we help each other move forward in career. I always like to think that the most important metaphor, even in not formal, informal relationships, is the notion of the assist. We're in a team together. We're all trying to make technology better for everybody. We're trying to think about societal issues. We have to assist each other, and the easiest and quickest way you can do that is to really acknowledge the provenance when somebody has scaffolded something that was a tiny idea for you that then became a bigger idea.
I think something that is also important, especially if you're a PhD student, is that advisors have different, I don't want to say policies, but different concepts of what they're comfortable with in terms of their students collaborating with other people. So I think definitely being transparent with your advisor if you are, for example, pursuing another project with another person, or if you want to include your advisor in those conversations, I think that kind of transparency is also very important.
Yeah, that's a great call out.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Wohn, do you have any kind of suggestions about, these are things that maybe students are not thinking about now, but could be useful to have as a food for thought? Did you have collaborators when you were a PhD student?
I did, but I feel like they all mostly came from my supervisor's side, right? Like she had previous students who have become professors in their own right.
Yeah.
And they're looking for students, and so I'd be part of those projects. I did have collaborators from workshops, which is why I brought that out. Another thing, if you've written a paper and cited someone, and this kind of goes towards what you were saying, I guess, do tell them about it. Because even if, say, you have this one paper that kind of really seeded your project, it doesn't really show much on when you write the paper, because maybe you cited them 2-3 times in the paper and they got added to the sea of references. If you see them in the conference, be like, hey, I read your paper, and that basically is the basis of this new paper that we've written. would you like to read it? I'm pretty sure most of them would say, yes, please give me the title. And sometimes that becomes, maybe opportunities for internship and or collaboration in the future. So,
No, absolutely. And don't worry about it necessarily being in line with what that person said, because actually, if you say very respectfully, you talked about this, and I felt like there was another thing that could be an extension of that, and so I used your work as a springboard to get to here, and I would love your opinion on whether you think, and if they come back with saying like, I would never have done that, you are completely wrong, that doesn't matter, because it's not personal, it's about the ideas. Yeah. It's about the ideas and about getting that peer discourse going.
Yeah, there's always missing parts of research and places where things can expand. And so, I feel like one of the sort of random things that was so powerful to learn as a student is that it's like you can read a paper and then it's like, I'm not sure if that's right, or maybe there is something more to be explored there, so.
Yeah. I sometimes like going to sessions that have nothing to do with what I'm doing, because then like you are able to connect dots that are completely separate, right? So,
Well, I was advised by a National Science Foundation program officer at one point that it was like, probably don't go to most of the talks where you would read the paper anyway, unless you want to like meet those people, and that you might want to do that, but definitely take some time to go, just go to some random session that's totally not related to what you do. So that can really spark creativity.
awesome. All right, well, we're going to open up the floor to some questions now. We have 2 student volunteers who have mics. They're with the red T-shirts. So if you could line up there to ask the questions, or if you have accessibility, please raise your hand and we will deliver the mic to you. There's no such thing as a bad question. It could also be a comment or an opinion. So gather up some courage.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm a research engineer at the moment. I completed my master's and I'm looking for a PhD position. What advice would you give me? And how do I approach people telling them, hey, I'm interested in your research area, can we talk more? Yeah, I mean, I basically said I can just say that, but what else advice would you give for someone in my position? Thank you very much.
If I can go just quickly, I think one thing I've come to realize is that understanding the sort of like funding landscape for where you want to go is worthwhile. So for example, I'm in Australia, and one of the things is that whenever the Australian Research Council announces grants, they basically list who the PIs are, the title, or the CIs, Chief Investigators, still learning the language, project abstract, where they're at and everything. So if you want to study in Australia, right, I would say keep an eye out for when those go out. And then like almost everybody on that list is now ready to hire a PhD student and pay them, maybe 2. And so it's like, at least for me, funding is the challenge. Like I will take every student, but I don't currently have any money to pay them with, and that's what's needed.
Yeah. The funding situation is very different by country and also continent. Like European schools tend to put out, it's almost like a job call where they say they're looking for a certain type of student to do certain research. In the US, it's very different from that. So I think if you, I don't know if you're like location bound, but like knowing those differences, and also like Asian schools have different funding situations, right? So if you have a more narrow scope, I think it would be easier to answer those questions. But I think in general, a PhD, there are very few schools who just accept a PhD student because they're smart, right? Usually there has to be a very strong alignment with your research interest and the other person's research interest. And so I think if you are interested in a certain faculty, having read their work and be able to kind of make your case for why your work would align with theirs is very, very important. But happy to talk more afterwards if you have more specific questions.
And before you sit down, like if you're gonna ask a question, I think it helps if you also state your name and just like where you're currently at. Because even if, I mean, I'm not promising that we'll remember because I probably would not, but sometimes, like say if you're doing this at a talk and you state your name and your affiliation, sometimes that comes in, so please.
Yeah, I was going to say there is that like, try to be quick, but it's like, you know, I've learned to always stand up and say, Phoebe Tube-Stugas, Monash University, and then say the question, right, just to help people. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yes, my name is Tianle. I'm from National University of Singapore. I'm based in Singapore right now, but I'm very flexible in terms of where I go for my PhD.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Carlos Urrutia. I'm a third-year PhD student at Open University of Catalonia, so that's here in Barcelona. Very happy and appreciate all the tips and revealing your karaoke passion. But more seriously, I wanted to ask any of the four of you about what do you think are the pros and cons of moving to industry or vice versa. I was very interested in Elizabeth's way to decide to kind of reverse it, because it seems there's like a trend of people leaving academia to industry. So I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and reflections about it.
I feel like maybe I can answer this because I did leave academia for industry. So the way that I chose where to go afterwards is that during my PhD, I did like a fellowship with I think now they call it the Energy Regulator of Canada. And so that was kind of like more of a government-style fellowship. And then I also visited Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. So it's like more like an academic-style research where you visit a different lab. And then, of course, I took an internship with industry. And I think for me, because at the time, Autodesk research is kind of like a good balance between academic research plus industry interest. I thought that was kind of like the best of both worlds, where I can, you know, still do data visualization research, HCI thinking, qualitative analysis, and things like that, but also have a little bit more money, which is not the end-all be-all, but yeah, that's kind of like my approach.
Well, I think I spent my whole career sort of dotting between the two. So although I left British academia to come into industry in Silicon Valley, throughout my time in Silicon Valley, I was always affiliated to universities. And I partnered and did research with a lot of interns and a lot of a lot of faculty. And I did a lot of grant reviewing for NSF, et cetera, and came to CHI, et cetera. So although I was industry, I, again, like you, chose a role where I could do a bit of both. And I have a lot of friends who went primarily into academia, but then would collaborate from the other side with industry. So it comes back to the comment really also about funding. And that it always goes through phases, right? So, you know, right now, all kinds of government funding have been reduced, and there is a squeeze there. But also, we have very different kinds of research labs that are emerging in industry. So just keeping your eye on, you know, what the trajectories are, where you're likely to get funding, which kind of like university, if you decide to go on to be a professor, are the ones that will actively encourage you with industry and government collaborations, so that you actually weave your career of impact through both the academy, but also government and applied research in industry. Because that's the way whatever you're passionate about is going to reach the most, to have the most reach and the most impact. I do know colleagues who are very academically focused and would prefer not to collaborate with industry, but by the very force of your question, I don't think that's you. Sounds like you would be interested in knowing a little bit more about one of these careers that you can weave between both, or three actually, spheres, because government also is very important.
Yeah, I was going to add, I have lived all in academia, but I was an intern with Elizabeth back at Yahoo Research. And I guess in my mind, a lot of the trade-off was sort of around, had I gone into industry, which I consider, like I applied to many industry positions, and I was about to try to move into Google before I got a professor position. But very much the sense that as long as my excitement and interest was like aligned with industry, there's probably a better chance of that being able to get out in the world and have an impact. At least in my experience with academia, and maybe I'm just bad at it sometimes. So it's very hard to get things beyond it's a cool paper, or I've worked with like local organizations, right? Getting things to change in response is hard, and I think in industry, again, with that sort of caveat of, are you aligned with what that industry wants or what the company wants?
Yeah,
potentially
I think that was
potential.
really important for me when I was making my decision, because I also did my sabbatical in industry. For me, to be quite honest with you, my colleagues who are of similar like rank or experience in industry, who are doing very well, like make at least 2 or 3 or 4 times as much as I do. Yeah. So if you really want to make money, like academia, I do not think, a traditional academic is not the way to go. Of course, you could also have a lot of side gigs as an academic. For me, it's the academic freedom is like a really big thing. For me to be able to choose what I want to study and not have anyone say anything about it was really, really big. And then the second thing was impact. And it's a trade-off because, like, for example, if I was working at a large company designing products, like I would affect millions or billions of people, right? But for me, like education and teaching the next generation, like that was where I saw value. So I think it comes down to values as well. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I said I've just gone to academia to set up this new department, and the courses that we've put together are very much courses which are sort of deep theory, and then there's a bunch of applied and practice. And one of the things that we're working on now is to make sure that we have excellent internship programs for every PhD who comes in, and we build those relationships and we scaffold the students coming in to be able to experience the government, the industry, and the sort of more pure academic line. And I've intentionally set that up with the support of many colleagues and friends, because I really fundamentally believe that the future is this weaving between the two to have impact from, I call it from pixels to policies. So what are you building all the way through to how what you build in collaboration with others is going to change governance structures around the application of technology. So I think, there are more and more universities that are offering that kind of thing. Maybe that's what you're experiencing right now as well. But trying to think about a little bit of both, I think from what your question framing was, might be the way to go.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, this has been a really informative session. Oh, by the way, my name is Ram. I go to NJIT. Actually, Dr. Wohn is my department chair, full disclosure. Yeah, so I was saying the session has been very informative. I learned a lot of new things. But my question is more around the networking aspect. I realize that when I meet people, when I approach people, I feel like I tend to fall into this trap of speed dating, where you just give a short elevator pitch, 10 seconds, and then you try to do a mental calculation of whether their research aligns with mine or whether any of their stuff aligns with mine, and then I move on. So I find it very hard to like really flesh out or nurture the relationship after I leave the conference, or like after I meet them, maybe even next day. So I feel like there's something I'm struggling with. I don't know if others have also felt this way, but I'm trying to get out of this trap of like, this is not, networking is not really speed dating, like in a platonic way, I mean, but you know what I mean.
Is it feeling like, swipe right, or swipe left? I think that is very common, and I don't think you should beat yourself up about this, because at a conference, it's actually very difficult to develop very meaningful conversations. And so even if you get very shallow conversations with a lot of people, I think that's a good start. And the thing is, it's like you never know who's going to really, how things are going to pan out with whom. So I think you're doing a good job. I mean, that's the only way you can start, right?
Yeah, I think there's also this piece around the sort of personal side of it as well. So you have this sort of like speed dating thing, which I'm also sort of mentally reading as being like, are my research areas aligned with, with the folks that I'm encountering? But some of it's also just around like just trying to be friends. And sometimes that little bit of interaction, right? And then someone notices you when they're whatever, nervous and standing in the wall and just say hi. That can just, whatever, kind of lay the foundations for more interactions later on.
Also, maybe following up on social media, like say if the person is active on Twitter, definitely give them a follow and slide into their DMs and say, hi, like we met briefly at Kai and this is what we talked about, really interested in keeping the connection alive. I am really bad at this, but also LinkedIn probably is more professional one. I don't go there every day, maybe like once a month, but I try to look at the messages that some students have left there for me, and sometimes that can start, like if they're asking for internships, I'd be like, hey, we have an opening, feel free to apply, so yeah.
And having lots of conversations, something might not seem like it's directly relevant to you right now, but you're at a conference, and on day 5, like 4 or 5 things might all suddenly fall into place. And you go, you know what? That first person I talked to, I now understand what they were talking about. I've got more context. I've got it. And it's fine to not have all of the puzzle pieces feel like a whole until the end of the conference or like a month away or whatever. So just snacking and then following up. This is what we're here for. We're here to kind of get different kinds of brain patterns, together and come up with new things. So I wouldn't feel bad about it at all.
Don't feel like you need to immediately gain some kind of benefit from each person you meet.
Yeah.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm also from NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. And my question is kind of along with Ram's question. And I found Kai is a really big conference. It's hard to find someone in the same field or even similar field. But if I intend to find potential collaborators, what are some suggestions to network or just work around to find those potential collaborators?
Yeah, so certainly the meetups and the workshops are good places to kind of, if you have the first conference I went to, they called it birds of a feather, right? Find other birds of a feather, right? That are broadly interested in the same scope of things you're interested in. Of course it is, more expensive and longer term, but also trying to find those sort of sub-conferences that are more focused on the things that you're interested in. Like for me, that ended up being Kai Play, but that kind of came along after I was no longer a student, which ends up being sort of the other whatever side quasi-insider thing to know is that it seems like all of the little sub-conferences are basically set to be opposite from Kai, maybe by design in terms of time of year. So those can be because they're so much smaller, it's so much easier just to meet almost everybody and hang out a little bit quieter time.
Also, I just remembered, like maybe if you're looking for an excuse to talk to someone, right now I think Kai is doing a bingo game where there's like one where it's like meet a cited author. So you can just like go to someone and it's like, hey, I'm doing. Did I turn that off? Just tell them that that you're doing the Kai Bingo, and I'm pretty sure that they'll be up to do it if they're not going any places, things like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kanak. I am from Simon Fraser University, Canada. I'll be presenting my paper on April 16. My question is that I'm a master's student and I have no job experience, but I have done internships in my undergrad, and I'm currently doing internships since January in my master's as well. I'm very much drawn to work after my master's as a UX researcher. But whatever interviews I have given or whatever jobs I'm applying, I'm seeing that most of the companies prefer PhD students as researchers, right? They would hire interns as well, those who have like PhD background far off. But I want to explore industry first. I will think about doing PhD later if I feel like. So, but I'm feeling really very stuck these days because there are very less job opportunities for a master's student. I thought that Kai would make it very easy for me, like getting a paper in Kai in master's may open a door, like a lot of doors, but still, like there are far more talented PhD students as well as, competitors. So I would like to have some guidance over that part, how to deal with it and how to actually make my way to industry first.
I think that the reality is that especially for like the very large companies, they want someone with a little bit more experience as a PhD researcher, because there are certain things that are covered in the PhD that are sometimes not covered in master's degrees, such as like theory or thinking like a little bit of bigger picture things. However, if you don't want to get a PhD, there are also a lot of smaller companies that don't necessarily require a PhD. And in those companies, you might be able to find roles that, for example, are a little bit less specialized. So like the larger companies tend to be very specific in terms of the type of researcher they're looking for example, like, qualitative researcher. But in smaller companies or even startups, they hire, they like people who are more versatile and can do different things. So that might be a point of entry potentially.
Plus one on that, I was going to say, look at startups or look at small companies. Also, you could look at consultancies. So there's some really interesting consulting firms where, they do everything from design to design engineering to product management to, that they have these specialities, but within the company, they want somebody who's flexible, and it will get you the experience that you want, and it will get your CV up there. So, thinking about like a consulting company, because they have lots of different customers, and so you will be working on lots of different kinds of projects. But, I was at Google for 10 years, nearly 10 years. And we definitely hired master's students to do research. The nature of the research would be perhaps more diverse, like you'd be put on different kinds of projects. You would be a quant researcher or a qual researcher or a mixed methods researcher, or you'd be an engineer or a coder or a designer. But it would just be that the scope of the work in terms of the extent to which you get to do the strategic definition of the work would probably be less, because you would come in as a master's at a slightly lower grade, which has a less broad scope. It'd be more applied. But that would give you the experience if you wanted to go back and do a PhD, if you wanted to hop somewhere else. But as you just said, the PhDs tend to come in at the higher levels, and typically those job scopes are more strategic because they require that sort of bigger picture, as well as some kind of speciality, which is what we used to call the T, the sort of T person. You're broad strategically, but you're deep in some kind of technical thing. As a master's, you're probably, with the amount of experience you've got, you're probably deep in something, but you've got some other broad skills. And there's this new term, what's it called, the PI person? So the pi person now is like pi, with 2 bars down and that, which I think is perfectly nerdy. Isn't that perfectly nerdy? Which is that you have a broad strategic sort of viewpoint on things, and you can do strategic thinking, but you might be, deep in, I don't know, like machine learning, but you also have a deep interest in qualitative research. And so these two things are disciplinary-wise a little bit, not the same things, but what people are looking for quite often now is that ability to hop between different disciplines and be translational. And if we're anything in HCI, we're translational. But I really think with a master's, going and getting some experience at some of these places where they're not going to lock you down too much will give you a real kind of way to rethink where you want to take your career.
Yeah, plus one to that. I guess like for myself personally, I did my PhD in computer science, right? But I have a lot of experience in design and arts, and I think that really helped becoming a pie person.
You're the pie person.
or a unicorn, where now you're able to do design research plus the more kind of more technical ones. And Autodesk as well, we have hired people who are in their masters for research engineering roles. And while, yeah, like these are more, you know, like directed already, you're probably going to be working with a scientist who has the idea and the research already set up, and you're helping them do the research. But at the same time, you get to collaborate as well, right? Like you can tell them, like you can learn from each other, because like say if I worked with the research engineers, I would also love to hear their thoughts and ideas, and I think that's how you can grow in that position. So yes.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Yes, good luck.
Hi, I'm Janaya, and I'm a PhD student based at UCL in the UK. So I'm interested in what you've mentioned about the softer skills in helping distinguish amongst such a technically strong cohort. And I guess this is a question for all of you, but what or which of your softer skills would you attribute or would say is most responsible for your career success today?
I went and got a degree in computer science, so I wouldn't have to talk to people and I could go hide. But it turns out that's not at all the brief. So your comfort in getting up in front of people and being an orator is definitely essential, and your ability to, create compelling presentations and communicate information about what you do, and then all of the stuff we talked about with networking. Honestly, I feel like a lot of those kind of skill sets end up eclipsing some of the more technical and design kind of things that we all kind of get trained in how to do.
Who in this audience thinks that humans are easy? Yeah, nobody. You know, the soft skills, as they're called soft, I mean, I hate that term. I just hate that term. It's ridiculous. Because, you know, actually dealing with other people and supporting other people and being a collaborator and being a manager and being a communicator and being an employee and being on a project. I mean, these skills and navigating, this is how the work of the world gets done. And it's extremely hard. And, you know, we're at a fantastic conference. We have people from all over the world. You saw the graphs this morning. But, you know, cross-cultural communication, understanding that somebody is a shy person, understanding that somebody is busy and not being brusque with you. These skills are really, really, really complex. And when I used to hire people at Google, you know, I'd hire brilliant PhDs, and I'd say, well, you know, during your PhD, you thought that 70% of your time or more potentially was on the research. The reality is, when we look at your success, it's about communication, from writing a paper to giving a presentation to doing the translational work in a meeting with an executive who has about 10 minutes. It's being persuasive. And so, you know, when you come into a place like Google and you take up a role, something like 40% of your time is going to be doing the research, and 60% plus is going to be doing the communications and being a good collaborator and a good team person and so forth. So, you know, I put it out to all of us. Can somebody come up with a better term than soft skills? Because these are the hard things.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
The humans, sorry humans, you're hard.
I think one thing that I like to do, or that I'm good at, is I'm really bad at remembering important things, but I'm very good at remembering random facts or interests. And that seems to really help relationships. Like, for example, there's this very shy professor at University of Washington, and he very rarely talks, but he takes great photographs of mountains when he's hiking. And so when I meet him, I talk to him about that, and then he's suddenly animated. And so I think like remembering things about what that person is passionate about, I think really helps. I think another thing is that I think everybody has their own path to social skills, and it really depends on like what you're good and what you love. I have a friend, Professor Yvette from University of Maryland. She has this personal hobby of creating little greeting cards, and so she sends those out, you know, for birthdays or holidays or whatnot. And I think that's like a great way to also like personally connect with people. So if you're able to kind of match some of those things with something that you personally love, I think that's always a good pairing.
One other little thing that Elizabeth sparked, right? Cross-cultural communication, but also cross-discipline communication and cross, I don't know what it is, educational level or positionality maybe. But you were saying, you know, talking to executives, right? It's not, I'm not trying to say someone more intelligent than someone else, but just a completely different perspective from I'm doing research versus someone who's an executive and you need to communicate with them. That's a very different thing than when you're talking to your colleagues or probably just about anybody at this conference. So, you know, kind of learning how to, whatever, alter language and explanations of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also, I guess it's easy to say, oh, you know, maybe I'm sounding like that as well, right? Like when you give advice and we're saying, oh, you know, go up to people and be more friendly, or like all of this kind of like just kind of try to be an extrovert. And so I feel like personally, I also think about the neurodivergence and all that other thing. And sometimes, you know, as a person with ADHD, sometimes I just gotta lean into the things that I know I could do, and not force myself to like try to do something that I know I'm gonna fumble. So, you know, then this could be more on that. Maybe you create your presentations more memorable, right? And because that one is more, you can practice that before even doing it, and.
Yeah.
I think that is one way to do that. Also, like making posts online, trying to send people to those posts, tagging them.
That's a great idea.
And so this kind of gives you that leeway of, yeah, maybe you're not good at going up to people and trying to, you know, befriend them. But by doing these other things that you might be able to do better, and leaning on that, I think that will help you become memorable as well. Oh, and a good-looking CV.
Oh, yeah.
Like, don't use like a random
Comic
template.
Sans? Comic
Yeah.
Sans? Are we allowed to
Comic
use Comic Sans?
If you're using it ironically, maybe. I do think there's some good use of Comic Sans out there, but yeah.
Depends on what kind of designer you are.
Exactly. Yeah, like try to show your personality in the CV as well sometimes. I mean, personally, if I see a CV that is well designed or a website, and I know this is also like extra work, right? But if you can lean on certain things, definitely make use of that advantage.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the panels for the great suggestions. My name is Meng Xuan. You can call me Summer. I'm currently a PhD student in University of Aberdeen in Scotland. So my question is, I find it a little bit hard for me to find collaborators because I work in interdisciplinary field. My PhD focused on use AI for cancer care. So I need my work need to show medical values, to show AI values, or to show Kai values. And when I go out to the conference, when I talk to people, I find people relevant to my work, but that's not like a majority part of the relevance, and it's like a small part. Then we had this discussion. We find it interesting, but our work is not like mostly aligned with each other. and we lose contact like after some time, and I feel like many people, their research is on a very small area. So I would like to know, like, if you have any suggestions for like find people maybe relevant to you, but you want to collaborate with them, and yeah, thank you.
I mean, I think we already talked about like workshops and papers and things like that. But if you look at, even if you find one paper that you're interested in, look at who the authors are and reach out to them. Because probably one of them is at this conference, right? And usually, if you know one person, they know another person who is in that area because they've cited all of these people, right? And so if you go kind of like that, you'll be able to quickly identify the people that you want to talk to.
Yeah. And also another thing is, I think you mentioned this earlier, like attending other, tangential research or talks that may not be directly your research. So I think you mentioned you're in medical type of research, but maybe because you're doing a communication part of that, like maybe, like how certain things are being communicated to patients, and maybe you use a data visualization to that. Data communication is a broader sphere of kind of area, and so you can try to find people who are in there, and actually sometimes that could help because maybe they are looking for something more like a domain-specific approach, right? And so if you tell them, hey, I'm doing this, I'm interested in your research, and insert broad research in there, and then tell them that you're working on a smaller subset of that. That could spark connections as well. So
I think it's good that not a lot of people are doing what you do because that makes you valuable, right? And so when you're looking for collaborators, don't try to find someone who does exactly the same as me, but like perhaps complementary to what I do.
Let's say +1 to what Wohn was saying, and I think a piece of that is just like if you step up sort of like one level conceptually on what it is you're doing, right? It's like I'm always up for talking to people who do like games plus human-computer interaction, even if they're not doing queer games or disaster response or whatever. So yeah, you can make those connections, and yeah, and then find the people who can help you do your work, not necessarily doing the same work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We have time for one more question.
Hi. Hi, my name is Uje from Yonsei University in Korea, and thank you for your wonderful speeches. My question is a little like out of topic, but I would like to ask about the academic skills or the research levels, because like my mainly is concerned about like I have some level of motivation for starting for my research, but it's always hard to make into very concrete levels of the research questions to define about it. And I always got some advice about like a more narrow down the scope for it. But like in my personal life, I think it was already enough, but always there is some more and more. So would you give me some advice whether it is because I didn't like fully more deeply related to the research, like find some related works, or is it about different scope that I can find of?
I mean, I would say reading, right? Of course. But since we're at a conference, I would say like workshop your idea. And what I mean by that is tell people what you're working on. And every time you tell someone, try to make it more specific and more specific. And as you're doing that, I think that really helps you practice in narrowing down your idea.
I think that's also what, I don't know, in a certain way it's, what I see having come into an Australian university recently, it's like that's kind of what our panels are often for, because I feel like a lot of what we do when we're being a panel for another supervisor student is to say like, hey, maybe that research question is maybe a little big and we're nervous that you can't really address it. Is there something narrower there too? So that's just kind of maybe from a supervisory perspective to sort of, I don't know, get folks who have a little more experience to also help you find the optimal scope. right? There's not necessarily narrower, but you want the right one.
I think there's also a lot of literature out there and some really accessible books by, things I would read on a plane or something, which is about the power of storytelling. And so I've been reading a lot of these, tips for storytelling. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is don't try to tell everybody everything all at once. Again, it's like find the hook and try the story out and make it a simple story. And then you can see if it lands or not, but you can also feel in your body whether that doesn't feel like the right story for me to be telling. I'm not that excited about it. And so as you practice these stories, when your affect is high, because I'm enjoying telling this story, actually, and you can see the other person, also passion is infectious, it's that way, right? But you can see the other person's eyes gleaming. You go, all right, I'm getting closer to the story I want to tell of what I'm interested in. But I actually found 2 or 3 of these little books were just super helpful. I just read them on a plane. And I was like, oh, that's a really good thing. Cut out a lot. And I sketch. I'll sketch a lot, this to this to this. It's almost like a very tiny mind map. And always, what is the end point that I want that person to go away with? Which actually comes to some of the things we said earlier. Because if what you tell somebody is engaging and compelling, you might find yourself a collaborator who helps you really hone down. And I think often in these panels, that's what a lot of excellent academics are doing as mentors, is to help tell that story.
All right, thanks so much for your advices.
Right. Well, can we give a round of applause for our excellent panelists today?
Thank you for the great question.
And thank you so much for coming. We'll be continuing the student mentoring programming, hopefully expanding it more for next year, but I hope you really enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you so much.
And a big thank you to Yvette. Big thank you. A little bit of a whooping. Woo! Woo-hoo!
Can you also take this? Rhyme about all the task.